A young millionaire was stunned when he spotted 4 children on the street who looked exactly like him. His curiosity led him into the life of a poor immigrant woman, a mother of those 4 children. From that moment, an unexpected connection formed, and together they created a miracle that would change his life forever. It all began one sunny day. Henry Graham, 38, a wealthy millionaire who owned a highly successful brokerage firm, sat behind the wheel of his roaring Lamborghini, feeling the smooth power of the engine as it glided through the busy streets of Manhattan. Henry's life had become a polished routine of luxury and indulgence, devoid of any real emotion or connection to the outside world. He had it all: money, status, freedom. Yet as he sped down the boulevard, there was a hollow inside him that he never acknowledged. Relationships were fleeting, his interests superficial, and family a concept as foreign as love. As he pulled up to a stoplight, something out of the corner of his eye drew his attention. A woman hurrying down the sidewalk was tugging along 4 small children. It was a scene of organized chaos, her energy trying to keep pace with the lively kids. But what caught Henry's breath in his throat was how eerily familiar the children looked. His gaze narrowed, his heart skipping a beat as he noticed the uncanny resemblance between himself and the kids. "No way," he muttered under his breath, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The children, all around the same age, had the same piercing blue eyes, the same sharp chin, even the same mischievous glint in their expressions. It wasn't just a passing similarity. It was as if he were staring at younger versions of himself. His mind raced for an explanation. Had he crossed paths with this woman before? Could they be his? It seemed absurd, but the thought lingered, festering. Without thinking, he turned the wheel sharply, pulling over to the curb just ahead of where the woman was heading. He parked with a screech, his pulse quickening as he stepped out of the car. The woman stopped in her tracks, her dark eyes filled with caution. Aurora, an immigrant with the resilience of someone who'd fought battles no one knew about, instinctively drew her children closer. She sized Henry up, his tailored suit, the air of wealth around him. It was the kind of man she never dealt with in her world. "Can I help you?" Aurora's voice was laced with suspicion, her hands protectively on her children. Henry struggled to find the right words. He had never been one to stammer or hesitate, but here he was, unsure of how to start. "These kids," he began, his voice low but faltering. He removed his sunglasses, his gaze locking onto the children's faces. "They look like me." The air between them grew tense. Aurora's eyes flickered with something, a flash of recognition, maybe fear, but she stood her ground, her chin raised. "That's none of your business," she said coldly, tightening her grip on the smallest child's hand. "It is my business," Henry insisted, his voice hardening. "Who's their father?" Aurora's face hardened. "They don't have a father," she replied firmly. "These are my children. That's all you need to know." But Henry wasn't convinced. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a pleading tone. "Listen, I don't know what's going on here, but the resemblance, it's impossible to ignore." He swallowed hard, a forgotten memory surfacing in the back of his mind. An old decision he'd barely given thought to, something about a sperm donation years ago. Could this be it? Could these children somehow be connected to that long-ago choice? "I'm not here to cause trouble," he added, his gaze softening, "but I need to understand." Aurora hesitated, torn between protecting her children and the undeniable truth staring her in the face. Her instincts screamed to run, to shield her family from the chaos that might come. But there was something in Henry's eyes, an earnestness, a vulnerability that made her pause. She sighed heavily, her defenses faltering. "It's not that simple," she murmured, her voice cracking. It was clear that he was the biological father of the Quadruplets. You have no right to ask me these questions," she replied, her voice rising slightly under the tension. "They don't have a father. They only have me." Henry heard her, but her words didn't sway him from what he was feeling deep inside. He knew with certainty that those children were a part of him. He sensed a connection that was beyond explanation, something he had never imagined. "Listen, I don't know how something like this could have happened," he said, his tone now softer. "I don't have a twin brother. I don't even have any siblings, but there has to be a reason. Please, let me understand." Aurora stood there, her face growing even paler, unable to respond or offer any explanation. Henry watched her, his mind racing, piecing together fragments of memories. There was something there, starting to take shape. A faint recollection of a decision he made years ago, one he never thought would have consequences. He took another step closer to her, his eyes locking onto hers, searching for the answer they both knew, though it hadn't been spoken yet. "Tell me one thing," he said, his voice deep and heavy with emotion he had never felt before. "Were you at the Glenview Fertility Clinic 5 years ago?" Aurora froze, as if an electric shock had passed through her. Her face grew even paler, and her lips trembled slightly. She tried to keep her composure, but the truth was seeping through every pore of her skin. The memories of those hard days, filled with uncertainty and loneliness, came flooding back like a storm. She dropped her gaze, unable to hold Henry's intense stare any longer. The children continued playing, unaware of the tension that gripped the adults. She stammered, swallowing hard, her voice barely audible. "Yes, I was." Henry felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Everything was suddenly making sense, but in a way he had never anticipated. Years ago, when his stock market ventures were just starting and financial struggles weighed on him, he made a decision he rarely spoke of. In a moment of desperation, he donated sperm under a strict protocol just to make some quick cash. It wasn't a decision he was particularly proud of, but at the time, it seemed like an easy way to ease his financial troubles. The clinic, reputable and well-known, had assured him that his sperm would be used only once and exclusively for a single woman. Now standing before him were 4 children, each one bearing his features like tiny reflections of his own face. He ran a hand through his hair, unable to believe what he was discovering. "So," he murmured, taking a deep breath as if the air might escape him. "They're my children?" Aurora, her eyes still fixed on the ground, nodded slowly. The weight of that truth fell on both of them like a crushing reality, surrounding them in a thick, unbearable silence. Henry finally spoke again, his voice steady, but filled with determination, while his eyes revealed a deep anguish. "Get in the car with the children. Don't ask any questions. I need your help. It's a matter of life and death." Aurora stared at him in disbelief, frightened by the intensity of his words. She didn't know what to do. The world seemed to have turned upside down in a matter of seconds, but deep inside, something told her she needed to listen, to find out who this man really was. A man who, in some way, was already part of her children's lives. Without saying another word, she looked at the 4 children surrounding her, and after a moment of hesitation, she nodded. "All right," she murmured, unaware that this simple gesture would change the course of their lives forever. The sound of the car starting echoed through the street as Henry accelerated into the unknown, a growing sense of responsibility and destiny settling in his heart. Inside the car, a heavy silence filled the air. It was so dense it seemed to crush any attempt at conversation. Henry's hands were steady on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, but his mind was elsewhere. The roar of the Lamborghini, which normally gave him a sense of power, was now nothing but background noise. Aurora, seated beside him, stared straight ahead, oblivious to the luxury surrounding her, focused solely on the children in the back seat. Their small bodies moved with the calm innocence that only ignorance of the situation could provide. Finally, Henry broke the silence. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but heavy with restrained tension. "What's your name?" Henry asked with genuine curiosity. "Aurora Burton," she replied, her voice barely more than a murmur. "Why?" he began, still not taking his eyes off the road. "Why did you turn to sperm donation?" He paused, choosing his words carefully, trying not to sound harsh. A woman like you, Aurora. So beautiful, so strong. How is it that you didn't have someone, a partner to share something so important with?" Aurora, caught off guard by the question, turned her gaze toward the window. Her lips tightened slightly as she searched for the words that still hurt to say. She remained silent for a few moments longer before taking a deep breath. With the same calmness she had faced the storms of her life, she decided to speak. "It's not always easy to explain why we choose the paths we take," she began. Her voice was soft but laden with a quiet wisdom. "Sometimes life pushes us down roads we never planned, and we find ourselves fighting for things we never thought would be so hard to obtain." Henry listened intently, not interrupting. "I came from Mexico 5 years ago," she continued. "I had a husband there. At first everything was beautiful, or at least I thought it was, but soon the pressure started. He humiliated me, despised me because I couldn't give him a child. I was married to him for 3 years, and during those years, the only thing he ever told me was that my worth as a woman depended on whether or not I could be a mother." She paused for a moment, her gaze lost in painful memories. "Finally, the diagnosis came," she added. "Infertility hit me like a sentence. My marriage crumbled, not because I wanted it to, but because he couldn't see me as anything other than a failure. He left me for that, for not being able to live up to the expectations the world had placed on me as a woman. I was left alone with my dignity in pieces, but also with the certainty that no one else would ever define my worth again." Henry felt a knot tighten in his throat. Aurora's words hit him like an uncomfortable truth he had never faced before. He couldn't imagine what she had gone through. "With the money I got from the divorce, I decided that if I was going to be a mother, I'd do it on my own terms," she said, now with more determination. "I came here to the United States, and I invested everything I had in that insemination. It was a risk, I know, but when life pushes you to the edge, you have to choose whether to jump with fear or with faith." She paused again, taking a deep breath. "That's how my quadruplets were born, Henry. They are all I have in this life. They are my reason for living, my strength. Everything I've done since then has been for them. I wasn't looking for a man to support them or to save me. I was only looking for something bigger than my own pain." Henry sat in silence, not only struck by her story, but also by the calm and power with which she told it. He had never met anyone like her. He had been surrounded by people who valued money, superficial beauty, and quick success. But Aurora spoke with a depth that he had never understood until now. "You know," she said with a small smile, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears, "sometimes life breaks you so that you can rebuild yourself stronger. Those who only look at what shines on the surface never understand that. But those who have known darkness, they know that the real gold is buried beneath layers of dust. My children are that gold, Henry, and it doesn't matter how they came to be here. They are my greatest treasure." Silence returned to the car, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with understanding, and as the children played innocently in the back seat, Henry Graham, for the first time in years, felt something inside him shift, as if a veil of superficiality had been lifted from his life, revealing a truth he had never sought and had never been interested in finding. The heavy silence was broken by the soft screech of the Lamborghini tires as they stopped in front of a grand mansion. The towering wrought iron gates opened automatically, revealing a vast estate surrounded by impeccably manicured gardens. The children leapt out of the car with boundless energy, running and laughing along the tree-lined paths that encircled the house. "Kids, wait!" Aurora called out, trying in vain to rein them in. "Be careful with the gardens!" But her efforts were futile. The 4 little ones ran without stopping, exhilarated by the sprawling green space around them. Aurora, slightly embarrassed by her inability to control them, Aurora glanced at Henry as if to apologize, but she found him watching the scene with a faint, mysterious smile on his face. "Let them be happy," he said, with a calmness that surprised her. "They've arrived at their father's house." The words hung in the air, as strange as they were flattering. Aurora looked at him bewildered. Something about his words felt odd, Yet there was a deeper meaning behind them that she couldn't quite grasp. "Why have you brought us here, Henry?" she asked, still confused. "You said it was a matter of life and death. What does all this mean?" Henry didn't answer immediately, just let the air of mystery linger. Then he simply extended his hand to her and, with a softer tone, said, "Let me show you. Follow me, Aurora. Bring the kids." With a mix of curiosity and apprehension, she called out to the little ones as they continued to run with excitement. This time chasing after Henry, Aurora followed them to the mansion. They passed through a grand marble foyer surrounded by towering columns and luxurious art, each step echoing through the vastness of the house. And while Henry remained silent, his demeanor conveyed a seriousness that Aurora couldn't ignore. After walking down a long, carpeted hallway, Henry stopped in front of an unusual door, one that looked older than the rest. "Is that you, Henry?" A trembling voice called from within the room. The voice belonged to an elderly woman, around 80 years old, with snowy white hair. She sat on the bed, her frail body contrasting with the strength in her expression. Though her eyes were clouded with age, she could barely see, but there was a quiet resilience about her despite her fragile appearance. Henry stepped closer, and his entire demeanor shifted. The hard, controlled exterior he usually wore fell away, revealing a vulnerability Aurora hadn't noticed during their journey. "She's my grandmother," Henry whispered to Aurora. "She raised me since I was a boy." Silence filled the air once again, but this time it was heavy with unspoken emotion. Aurora could feel that she was witnessing something deeply personal, something beyond the wealth and power Henry often displayed. Henry approached the bed, gently took his grandmother's hand, and spoke with a tenderness that caught Aurora off guard. "Grandmother, I don't want you to leave this world without having your greatest wish fulfilled," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I haven't just brought you one great-grandchild. I've brought you 4 identical ones." The elderly woman's nearly blind eyes opened wide, and a silent tear rolled down her wrinkled cheek. The emotion in the room was tangible, as if time itself had paused. "4?" she whispered, trying to grasp what her grandson had just said. "My great-grandchildren?" Henry nodded, his hand trembling slightly as he intertwined it with hers. Aurora, moved by the weight of the moment, walked over to the elderly woman. With a tenderness that came from deep within her soul, she knelt beside the bed, taking the woman's other hand into hers. Speaking softly, each word was filled with heartfelt sincerity. "They are your great-grandchildren," Aurora whispered. "They were born with all the love in the world. They have been the light of my life, and now they are part of yours too." Overwhelmed by Aurora's words, the grandmother squeezed their hands with the little strength she had left. "My dear child," the old woman murmured, her voice frail, but carrying the weight of a lifetime's wisdom. "The life you've brought into this home is a gift beyond measure, greater than even the stars. I don't know how these children came to you, or how the heavens aligned to unite your heart with theirs. But deep down, I feel that your love was destined for them, long before the wind ever whispered their names, for I see in your eyes the tenderness that only true love can give. You have been the river that brought new life to this land, and with every smile from these little ones, the universe's gratitude is written. And for that, my own gratitude toward you knows no end. Now I bless you from the deepest part of my heart." Tears filled Aurora's eyes, but her smile never faded. It was a moment as unexpected as it was beautiful. The bond that had just formed between her and the elderly woman was profound, transcending blood ties. Henry, contemplative and silent, smiled. For the first time in his life, he felt his heart beat with something more than the frantic rhythm of business and success. It was a warm beat filled with peace, telling him that perhaps all this time he had been searching for something that only now he was beginning to understand. The children, who had been watching curiously from the doorway, rushed over to the bed, carefully nestling beside their great-grandmother, wrapping her in their small, loving hands, surrounded by the 4 little ones who symbolized the future of her lineage. The elderly woman smiled tenderly. "Now I know I can leave peacefully," whispered the grandmother, looking at Henry with eyes full of love and peace, "because I see that you have found what truly matters, Deeply moved, Aurora bent down and kissed the elderly woman's hand, silently sealing a promise of love and family that, though unexpected, now belonged to them all. "And what are their names, dear? What are the names of these angels you've brought into my life?" the grandmother asked, her voice soft and filled with gentle tenderness. With a heart full of the unconditional love her children had inspired in her, Aurora answered, her voice carrying a solemn tone. "Each one bears a name with deep meaning. Eliza is the first. It means that love is the force that conquers all. Lila, the second, is the light that always finds its way even in the darkest places. Rose, my third, is the eternal miracle, the manifestation of the divine in everyday life. And Sophie is endless love, the kind that never runs dry, the love that lasts forever." The grandmother, moved to her core, took the children's small hands with infinite tenderness, while Henry, who had been silent until then, felt a tear roll down his cheek. He had never experienced a moment so genuine, so full of truth. In front of him were not just 4 children, but the promise of something eternal, something he had always longed for, even without knowing it. That night, after the moving scene with his grandmother, Henry knew he couldn't let Aurora and the children return to the small house they lived in. As they sat in the spacious living room of the mansion, the children already dozing off on his lap, and Aurora looking around with curiosity, Henry broke the silence. "I want you to stay here," Henry said, with a calmness that tried not to sound controlling. "This mansion has more than enough space, and I don't want you going back to that small place you rent. Don't worry about your things or the children. I can buy everything you need brand new. Tomorrow morning we'll head out, buy whatever we need. But tonight I want you all to be comfortable." Aurora looked at him, a bit confused by his generosity, but there was something in his voice that she couldn't dismiss. Her life had always been a constant battle, and yet this man, flawed as he might be, seemed to offer something more than just wealth. He offered something real. "Material things don't always bring happiness, Henry," she said softly, gently stroking the children. "But I understand that sometimes we need to accept what's offered to us with gratitude, because love isn't just measured by what we give, but also by what we allow ourselves to receive." Henry nodded, visibly moved by her words. Without wasting any time, he called for one of the house staff and asked her to show them to one of the mansion's most luxurious suites. Meanwhile, the children, now wide awake, dashed toward him. "Look, Mom!" they squealed with delight, as one by one they hugged Henry's legs, vying for his attention. "I'm hugging him tighter!" one of the kids exclaimed. "No, I'm hugging him tighter," another quickly retorted, all of them pressing up against him. Henry, unable to hold back his emotions, felt tears of pure joy escape. He wrapped them all in a warm embrace, his heart swelling with a sense of love he had never known before. "Go on, get some rest," he said, smiling through his tears. "Tomorrow is going to be a very special day." Aurora stood watching from a distance, seeing this man who at first had seemed like a distant stranger, transformed before her very eyes. It was as if the love these children radiated had softened him, revealing a man completely different from the one she had met. The next morning, they awoke to a radiant sun shining through the windows, and Henry, Aurora, and the Quadruplets embarked on what would turn out to be an extraordinary day. Their first stop was a high-end boutique, where the children, along with Aurora, tried on vibrant new clothes with soft textures, excited by each item they wore. After choosing everything they needed, they made their way to an upscale restaurant in the heart of Manhattan, where they shared lunch filled with laughter and games. "You know, Henry," Aurora said as the children's laughter echoed in the background, "it's not the material things that make this day shine so brightly in our hearts. It's the happiness that comes from within, the laughter of children that rises like a song. In every moment of peace and love shared, we find the true riches that time can never take away. That's what truly matters." Henry looked at her, admiring her wisdom. "You're right. The material has always been there, but moments like this never." After lunch, they headed to a playground where the kids had the time of their lives on swings, carousels, slides, and mini-trains, their laughter echoing across the park. The afternoon concluded with a visit to a famous ice cream parlor, where Henry, Aurora, and the children sat together enjoying large bowls of ice cream, exchanging knowing glances and smiles filled with contentment. When they returned to the mansion, the atmosphere was peaceful, but as they stepped into the grand foyer, something unexpected awaited them. Standing at the far end of the room was an elegant figure, a woman distinguished by her grace and refinement. She wore a luxurious fur coat, gleaming with expensive jewels adorning her neck and ears. Henry froze the moment he saw her. His face turned pale instantly. "Who is this elegant lady, Henry?" Aurora asked, her voice filled with surprise, clearly not understanding the sudden tension that had taken over Henry's expression. Henry didn't answer. He was paralyzed, unable to form a single word. The woman, sensing the awkwardness of the situation and noticing the undeniable resemblance between the quadruplets and Henry, decided to step in with a calculated smile. "Let me answer for him, darling. It seems he's just so excited to see me that he can hardly speak," she said as she stepped forward. "I'm Louisa Robert, the famous fashion designer, and Henry's fiancée. I've come here to marry him." The room seemed to freeze in that instant, and Henry's heart stopped completely. He felt the air leave his lungs at Louisa's words. It was as if time had come to a halt, and her declaration echoed through the room like thunder. "Wait a minute. What did you just say?" Henry exclaimed, stepping forward, his eyes locked on Louisa. "We haven't agreed on any wedding date. You know I'm not the kind of man who's into marriage. I don't like formalities or commitment." Louisa's gaze drifted to Aurora, with a mix of mockery and disdain. "You'll change your mind soon, my love," she replied sharply. "But hold on. Who is this woman with such a modest appearance? And who are these 4 children who look so much like you?" Her question made Henry hesitate. He couldn't find the words. The lump in his throat made it impossible to speak, and for a moment, he felt like the ground was slipping out from under him. Before he could muster a response, Aurora stepped forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "I'm Aurora Burton, ma'am," she answered firmly, "and these are my children." She paused deliberately, locking eyes with Louisa, then turning to Henry. "Correction, ma'am. These are our children. The quadruplets have a wonderful father, I assure you. Your fiancé is an amazing dad." Her words landed like a bomb in the room. Louisa's expression hardened, her eyes narrowing as the color drained from her face. "What?" Louisa repeated incredulously, her voice rising with each word. "Henry is their father? How could a man as distinguished as him ever take notice of someone as humble as you?" she added with venom. "Everyone knows Henry only has affairs with the most sophisticated, glamorous women from high society, and of course, I stand out above them all." She smugly adjusted a loose strand from her flawless hairstyle. "Our relationship has lasted a year now, the longest he's ever had, because I am the love of his life. An extraordinary woman." Henry felt a whirlwind of emotion swirling inside him, his gaze flickering between Louisa, who still projected that air of arrogant confidence, and Aurora, whose eyes reflected a blend of defiance and vulnerability. Mustering all his courage, he cut in. "Answer my question, Louisa," Henry demanded, his tone harsher than usual. "Where did you get the idea that we're getting married?" Louisa didn't respond immediately. Instead, she gracefully made her way to the couch with the elegance of someone who's used to being the center of attention on a runway. She reached for her luxurious handbag, opened it, and pulled out an envelope from within. She took out an ultrasound image and handed it to Henry with a calculated smile. "Take a look at this, love," she whispered with venomous sweetness. "There are 3 babies on the way." She then loosened her coat, revealing her belly, which had already started to show the unmistakable signs of pregnancy. The air in the room grew tense as Aurora, her gaze still serene, spoke to Louisa. "You know, ma'am," she said softly but firmly, "a person's worth isn't measured by the wealth they flaunt, but by the purity of their heart and the strength of their love. Sometimes the real gold isn't the one that shines, but the one hidden, waiting to be discovered by those who know how to look beyond the surface." Without waiting for a response, Aurora turned to Henry. Her expression softened as she looked at her children. "I'm going to take the kids to their room so they can rest. I think you need some space to prepare for your wedding," she said, her voice trembling ever so slightly as she spoke the last word. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. The children watched with curiosity, holding Aurora's hand as she started to climb the stairs, but just as she reached the first step, Henry's voice broke through the tension. "Stop, Aurora!" he exclaimed, his voice full of urgency. "Don't go!" Louisa stepped forward, her tone sharp with indignation. "Why are you begging this poor woman, Henry?" she interrupted coldly. "There's no reason for her to stay and listen to such an intimate conversation between us. We have so much to celebrate, love." Henry looked at her, his expression hardening. "This needs to be addressed, Louisa," he replied with firmness. "How exactly are you pregnant with my child?" Louisa raised her chin defiantly. "There's nothing to clarify. It's simple. We're a couple in love. It happened the night before I left for Paris," she said, with evident disdain. "But tell me, how is it that you have quadruplets with this vagabond? Well, let's just forget about that silly thing you did years ago with this poor woman and focus on celebrating everything that awaits us, my future husband." Aurora gripped her children's hands tightly. Her gaze shifted from Henry to Louisa, then back to Henry, who still seemed caught in a whirlwind of emotions. With a resolute gesture, she took the first step to leave, though she paused to speak. "Eliza, Sophie, Lila, and Rose," she said. "They are the most important part of my life, and now they're part of yours too. No matter what you choose, nothing will change this beautiful parenthood as long as you embrace it with all your heart. For now, I must go." She paused and looked directly at Louisa, her calm unshaken. "As for you, ma'am, remember that sometimes the richest soul wears neither silk nor jewels, but is forged by love and strength that rise from adversity. Perhaps one day you'll understand." With that, Aurora turned and started up the stairs. But before she could completely leave, a familiar sound echoed through the room. It was the creak of a walker. Henry's grandmother, usually confined to her room, almost bedridden by the weight of her age and loneliness, was making her way forward, her steps slow but determined. She had chosen to rise, driven by the joy brought to her by the 4 great-grandchildren Henry had unexpectedly brought home the day before. The old woman stopped at the entrance of the living room, her voice ringing out with an unusual firmness. "What is happening here?" she demanded. Then, as she saw Aurora climbing the stairs with her great-grandchildren, who were innocently playing, racing each other to see who could go down the stairs the fastest, the grandmother asked again, this time more urgently, "Henry, will you tell me what's going on?" Henry swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Confusion and tension clouded his thoughts, but he knew he had to answer. "Grandma, Louisa says she's expecting 3 children," he said, his voice thick with disbelief. "She claims she's pregnant with my children, but I don't understand how it's possible, and she's talking about setting a date for the wedding." Sensing the situation slipping away from her, Louisa stepped closer to Henry, taking his arm in an attempt to soften the atmosphere with a well-practiced smile. "Henry, darling, what matters is that we're expecting 3 babies," she said, her voice sweet and conciliatory. "This is something to celebrate, not to question. Haven't we overcome so much together?" But there was something in Henry's eyes that showed he wasn't going to be swayed so easily. He took a deep breath, and with a firm tone, he replied, "That's not true," said the grandmother, her voice cracking momentarily before regaining its strength. "Louisa, you cannot be expecting any child of my grandson." The room fell into a thick silence as her words landed with a force no one had anticipated. Henry stared at his grandmother, utterly perplexed, unable to fully comprehend what she had just revealed. Louisa, her face pale with shock, let go of Henry's arm, suddenly at a loss for words. "How could you say that, old woman?" Louisa stammered, her confidence wavering for the first time. "What are you insinuating? Are you calling me a liar? Or do you actually prefer this vagabond over me to continue your family line?" Leaning on her walker, the grandmother took a step forward, her expression a mix of relief and severity. she responded, her gaze piercing through the fashion designer. "Henry's fiancée. I will answer both of your questions, Louisa, in that same order. Yes, I am calling you a liar, and yes, it's true. I would prefer a homeless woman 1,000,000 times over you to carry on my family line." Her eyes, filled with the wisdom that only years of life and experience could provide, then settled on Henry, as if she was about to reveal a truth he didn't know she was aware of. "As for you, my dear grandson," she began, her voice soft but loaded with an undeniable authority. "3 years ago, you fell ill with a painful testicular condition that required surgery to correct. I know you spoke with the doctors about having a preventive vasectomy at the same time. Since you didn't want children, ties, or any formal commitments, you went ahead with the vasectomy without telling me." It had been a difficult time for Henry, a period when the pressure and fear of commitment had driven him to such measures. He hadn't wanted attachments or the risk of an unplanned child. His grandmother had been there, though he had always believed she didn't know everything. "Grandma," he murmured, his eyes wide with confusion. "How did you know?" "I always thought you only knew about the corrective surgery, nothing more." The old woman nodded, her frail hands gripping the walker gently, as if the knowledge she carried was both a burden and a comfort. "I always knew, Henry. I knew because I was there with you when the doctors explained what was happening with your testicles. And I saw that spark in your eyes, the one you get when you're planning something behind my back. You were like that ever since you were a child. That's why afterward, I met with the doctors discreetly and confidentially. The vasectomy was your decision, and I respected it, even though it brought me deep pain. Pain that only lifted yesterday when this beautiful young woman brought your 4 children to light up this home and give me back my life." Her words softened but remained firm. "I also know you never reversed that procedure because I've kept a close watch on you without you even realizing it. And I know you can't have biological children, not since then, because you've done nothing to change that. I waited for the miracle that you'd reverse the vasectomy, but it never came. However," she said, smiling at Aurora, "the miracle happened in another way 5 years ago, in this beautiful woman with the most beautiful children my eyes have ever seen." Henry felt the ground beneath him begin to crumble. The truth his grandmother had just revealed hit him like a wave. He had hurt her with his selfish decisions without even realizing it. The silence was broken by the sound of Louisa's quickened breathing as she tried to compose herself. "This is absurd!" she screamed in a desperate attempt to hold on to her lie. "She doesn't know what she's saying. I'm pregnant with Henry's baby. I have the proof in this ultrasound." "You can't be," his grandmother stated calmly, "not after what he chose to do." Aurora, who had been watching quietly, took a deep breath. She decided to step forward, looking at Henry with understanding. She knew he was facing a difficult truth, but she also believed he had the strength to overcome it. "Henry, this is a lot for you," she began gently, placing a hand on his arm. "You didn't expect to be a father, and I understand that your past decisions were based on how you felt then. But these children are real. They are a part of you in a way neither of us could have foreseen." The 4 little ones played without a care, unaware of the emotional storm shaking the adults around them. Henry slowly knelt down in front of them, gazing at their innocent faces, so identical to his own. He felt a tear roll down his cheek as he gently stroked the head of one of the children. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," he murmured, his voice breaking with emotion. He had never imagined this was possible. He hadn't expected any of this. He never knew he could love someone so deeply without ever seeking it out. His grandmother smiled proudly from where she stood, watching her grandson. She had feared that Henry would shut himself off from love, but now she saw him beginning to open his heart, accepting the complex gifts life had given him. Henry stood up, a new determination shining in his eyes. He looked at Louisa, his expression no longer one of doubt but a firm resolve. "This is over, Louisa," he declared, his voice clear and decisive. "I don't know how you concocted this lie, but you cannot be pregnant with my child. My grandmother is right in everything she's revealed, and you have no place here anymore." Defeated and furious, Louisa cast one final hateful glance before turning sharply and storming out of the room. I should have stayed in Paris, she muttered bitterly. At least the father of my kids, though a foolish poor man not worthy of me, with whom I had a night of drunken weakness. At least he's happy to be with a woman like me, not like you. Stay with your miserable vagabond. Henry, still moved, turned his gaze towards Aurora and his grandmother. He knew that his life had changed forever, yet now he was ready to embrace that responsibility. Aurora, he said, his voice trembling with sincerity. I know I've made mistakes, and I know this is difficult, but if you give me the chance, I want to be the father these children need, and I want to be part of their lives, and yours too. You're simply perfect. It feels like I've known you my whole life. I love you, Aurora. Aurora looked at him for a long moment, before a soft smile appeared on her face. Just as the sun rises every day, life also offers you a new chance, Henry, she responded calmly. We can be reborn together. With tears of pride and joy, his grandmother stepped forward to join them. The children, unaware of the depth of what was happening, also gathered around Henry and Aurora. In that moment, Henry realized he had found something far more valuable than any fortune. He had found a family and the promise of a future filled with love. A few weeks later, in an intimate celebration, they held the most beautiful wedding anyone could have imagined. Surrounded by the truest emotions two people can express, Henry became a more compassionate man, finally understanding the wisdom in not judging a book by its cover and embracing the truth behind the saying, "Wealth is not in what we have but in who we are," as Ralph Waldo Emerson once wrote. Wow, what a journey, right? Henry Graham, a man who thought he had it all, suddenly faced with a reality he never expected. 4 children who mirror him in every way. Life has a funny way of steering us toward paths we never imagined, and Henry's transformation is just the beginning. It's a reminder that sometimes what we truly need isn't what we've been chasing after, but what finds us when we least expect it. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more content that dives deep into these life-changing moments. Let me know in the comments, what would you do if you were in Henry's shoes? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.